The courtroom was cold that morning. A soft hum came from the ceiling fan as people whispered in low voices, waiting for the hearing to start. At the front sat the judge, an older man with calm eyes adjusting his glasses as he looked through the case file. The air felt heavy, like everyone already knew something important was about to happen. Then the door opened. A young girl no more than 8 years old walked in holding a small stuffed rabbit close to her chest. She wore a plain blue dress, her shoes slightly scuffed, and her long brown hair tied back with a ribbon that looked like it had been tied in a hurry. Her name was Emily Carter. The sound of her small footsteps echoed as she walked toward the witness stand. The bailiff gently helped her up, and the judge smiled softly, trying to make her feel less afraid. But even with that kindness, Emily's face showed how nervous she was. Her eyes darted around the room, first at her mom, sitting on one side, then at her dad on the other. Her mother, Laura, looked pale, exhausted, and heartbroken. She had dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights, and her hands were clasped tightly together, as if she was silently praying. On the opposite side, her father, Daniel, sat stiff and serious. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Daniel didn't seem to hear. His gaze was fixed on Emily. The judge cleared his throat and spoke in a calm voice. "Emily, sweetheart, I know this is not easy, but you're very brave to be here today." Emily nodded softly but didn't say a word. Her small fingers gripped the stuffed rabbit tighter. Everyone in the courtroom could feel the tension. It wasn't like the loud fights people imagine from TV dramas. This silence was heavier, sad, deep, and filled with all the words that had already been said at home, behind closed doors. The custody case between Laura and Daniel had gone on for months. There had been countless arguments, tears, and accusations. Each parent wanted to prove they could provide the better life for their daughter. But what no one had expected was that the final decision might depend on what Emily herself had to say. The lawyer representing the court stepped forward. She was kind-faced, careful with her words. She looked at Emily and smiled. "Hi, Emily. You can call me Miss Taylor, okay?" Emily gave a small nod. Miss Taylor continued gently. "Do you know why you're here today?" The little girl hesitated, her lips pressing together before she whispered, "Yes, to say who I want to live with." Those words, so quiet and innocent, still hit like thunder. Even the people sitting in the back row felt the weight of them. Emily's mom lowered her head, tears already filling her eyes. Her father's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. Miss Taylor knelt slightly so she could look at Emily at eye level. "You don't have to be scared, okay? Just tell the truth. Whatever you say, everyone here will listen." Emily looked down at her stuffed rabbit, brushing its ear with her thumb. For a long moment she said nothing. The judge waited patiently. Even the sound of papers shuffling stopped. It was as if the whole courtroom was holding its breath. Then finally Emily spoke. "I love both my parents," she began, her voice trembling. "But things at home haven't been good for a long time." A small murmur ran through the audience, but the judge raised his hand for silence. Emily looked up, her eyes glistening. "Sometimes when they fight, I cover my ears. I go to my room and turn up the TV so I can't hear them. But it doesn't help. I still hear the yelling." Her voice cracked a little, and Miss Taylor quickly handed her a tissue. Emily took it, wiped her nose, and continued. "One time I tried to make them stop fighting. I told them to please stop. But they didn't hear me. I don't think they even knew I was standing there." Laura buried her face in her hands, quietly sobbing. Daniel looked down, guilt spreading across his face. Emily looked over at her mom and gave a small, broken smile. "Mom always tells me that Dad is still a good man. Even when he says bad things about her, she tells me to forgive him. She says people say mean things when they're hurting." You could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. It wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about love, forgiveness, and the things a child sees when adults think she's not looking. Miss Taylor spoke softly. "And how do you feel when your mom says that?" Emily took a deep breath, her tiny shoulders rising and falling. "It makes me sad because she's crying while she says it." The judge's face softened. No one spoke. The courtroom that had been so filled with tension moments ago now felt heavy with emotion. Miss Taylor looked over her notes, then asked gently, "Emily, what do you want to tell the judge today?" "You can say whatever is in your heart." Emily looked at her dad first. He met her eyes for a second, then looked away. Then she turned to her mom. The love in her gaze was clear, But there was something else there too, a deep understanding far beyond her age. "I don't want them to fight anymore," she whispered. "I just want them to be happy, even if it means I can't see one of them every day." Her words broke whatever walls were left between the adults in that room. Laura cried openly now, and even Daniel, who had sat so coldly at first, wiped a tear from his cheek. Miss Taylor gave Emily a small nod. "You've been very brave, Emily. Thank you for telling us the truth." The judge leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle. "Emily, you did very well today. You told us something no one else could." Emily looked at him and managed a small smile. She held her stuffed rabbit close as she climbed down from the stand. When she walked past her mother, Laura reached out, but she didn't say anything. She just brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Emily gave her a soft hug before being led out of the courtroom by an attendant. The room stayed silent long after the door closed behind her. Everyone seemed lost in thought, realizing that sometimes the smallest voice can say the biggest truths. The judge took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and sighed deeply. He looked over at both parents. "It's clear this little girl has seen and felt more than any child her age should have to. I hope both of you understand the responsibility that comes with that." Neither Laura nor Daniel spoke. They just sat there, tears streaming down their faces. As the session ended, the people in the audience quietly got up, whispering to each other about what they'd just witnessed. It wasn't the kind of courtroom story that would be forgotten easily. There were no loud arguments, no shouting, no drama, just the soft, honest voice of a little girl who loved her parents and wanted peace. Outside the courthouse, the cold wind brushed against the trees as Emily waited with the social worker. She looked up at the sky, still holding her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Did I do okay?" she asked softly. Miss Taylor smiled and nodded. "You did more than okay, sweetheart. You were brave, very brave." Emily smiled a little, then looked back at the big doors of the courthouse. Somewhere inside, her mom and dad were probably still talking to their lawyers, but she hoped they were talking to each other too. For the first time in months, she felt a small sense of relief. Maybe things weren't fixed yet, but at least she had told the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that truth would change something. As she got into the car, the stuffed rabbit sitting on her lap, Emily whispered quietly to herself, "I just want everyone to be happy again." The car drove away, leaving behind a courthouse that had just witnessed something rare. Honesty so pure it left grown adults speechless. And though the case was far from over, that morning became the moment when everything began to change. The days after Emily's testimony were filled with more silence than anyone expected. It was as if the courtroom had swallowed up all the words, and now, the people involved didn't know what to say or how to say it. Emily's parents, Laura and Daniel, both went back to their routines, but nothing felt the same. Daniel had always been the more distant parent. He wasn't a bad father, but he wasn't the type to get emotional either. His job kept him busy, and even when he was home, he wasn't truly present. For him, work was a way to avoid the mess of his marriage with Laura. He tried to bury everything with long hours, hoping it would all go away. Laura, on the other hand, had always been the one who wore her heart on her sleeve. She loved deeply even when it hurt, even when it didn't seem to make sense. And it was that love, that need to protect her daughter, that had driven her to stand by Daniel for as long as she had. She believed in second chances, in the idea that people could change, but somewhere along the way that hope had started to crack, and now it was too late to fix it. The night after the hearing, Laura couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight on her chest that she couldn't shake off. Her daughter's words played in her mind over and over again. "She's crying while she says it." Laura's heart ached. Emily was too young to understand how much her mother had sacrificed, how hard she had tried to keep the family together. Laura had thought that if she just tried harder, if she loved harder, things would get better. But Emily had seen it. She had seen everything. And then there was Daniel. He spent the night in his office, the glow of his computer screen lighting up his tired face. He couldn't bring himself to go to bed. His mind was spinning with thoughts of Emily, of his relationship with her, and of the years that had gone by, without him really being there. It wasn't just the custody case that had shaken him. It was everything. The realization that he had failed his daughter, that he had been too caught up in his own life to see what was happening at home, was hard to swallow. Daniel had always thought that as long as he provided for them, As long as he made sure they had a nice house, good schools, and all the things money could buy, that would be enough. But now he saw the truth. Those things didn't matter if you weren't there for the people who needed you most. Emily needed more than a roof over her head. She needed a father who could listen, who could be there when she cried, who could show her that she was loved no matter what, and he had failed to do that. The following day, after the dust had settled a bit, the lawyers began discussing the next steps. But what no one expected was the unexpected phone call that came through to Laura's phone that afternoon. It was from Daniel. "Laura." His voice was hesitant, quieter than usual. "We need to talk." She hadn't expected to hear from him. It had been months since they'd spoken about anything other than the custody case, and even then, those conversations were tense and filled with anger. But something in his voice told her this was different. She was hesitant at first. "What is it?" she asked, trying not to sound too angry. Her emotions were a roller coaster. One minute she wanted to scream at him, the next she just wanted to cry. She had no idea how to feel anymore. I've been thinking about everything," Daniel said slowly. "About Emily, about us. I don't know how things got this bad. I guess I thought if I just worked hard enough, everything would be fine. But I see now that I wasn't there when she needed me." Laura felt a lump in her throat. She could hear the pain in his voice, the regret. It wasn't enough to undo the years of distance between them, but it was a start, a small but important start. "I know," Laura replied quietly. "I've been thinking about it too. And I've been thinking about Emily. She's the one caught in the middle of all of this, and we're both failing her." Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment. He was processing everything, his mind racing. "I don't know what the right thing to do is, Laura. I really don't, but I don't want to lose her." "Not like this," Laura's voice softened. "Neither do I." They sat in silence for a while, both unsure of where this conversation would lead. Neither of them had answers, but for the first time in a long time, they were both speaking honestly about what had been broken between them. Later that week, they agreed to meet at a neutral location, somewhere away from the courtroom, away from the pressure. The cafe they chose was small and quiet, a place where people came to unwind and enjoy a coffee in peace. It felt like a safe space, a place where they could talk without all the weight of the legal battle hanging over them. Daniel arrived first, sitting down at a corner table. He was nervous, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup as he waited for Laura to arrive. When she did, she seemed different. She wasn't as tense as she usually was when they were in the same room. There was something in her eyes, something that told him she had finally accepted the reality of their situation. She wasn't just holding on to the past anymore. She had made peace with the fact that things had changed. "Hi," Laura said, sitting down across from him. "Hi," Daniel replied, his voice a little strained. "I didn't know if you'd want to meet." "I wasn't sure either," Laura admitted, but she didn't seem angry. She just looked tired of everything. "But I think it's time we stop pretending things are okay when they're not." Daniel nodded. "I know, I guess I've been pretending too. Pretending that I could fix it all with money and work. Pretending that everything would just get better." They both paused, each reflecting on their own failures. There was no blame anymore, only the recognition that they had both contributed to the breakdown of their marriage, and that the person who had suffered the most was Emily. "I talked to Emily after the hearing," Laura said, breaking the silence. "She's scared. She doesn't know what's going to happen. But what scares me the most is that she's old enough to understand that we're not the same anymore." Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. "I don't want her to be scared anymore. I want her to know that we're trying to be better for her." They both sat there talking about their daughter, about their mistakes, and about what they could do to make things right. It was slow, painful, but it was honest. When they finally stood up to leave, it wasn't a dramatic moment. Nothing like the angry confrontations they'd had in the past. It was simply a quiet decision to move forward, to start healing. As they walked out of the cafe together, neither of them said much. But there was a feeling between them, something hopeful. It wasn't a promise that everything would work out perfectly, but it was a small step in the right direction. For the first time in a long time, both Laura and Daniel realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back. Not to what they were, but to something new. Something better for Emily. And as they walked away, Emily's words echoed in their minds. They didn't want to fight anymore. They didn't want her to be scared. They just wanted to fix what was broken. The next few weeks after the meeting at the cafe were filled with small changes. Both Laura and Daniel were trying to adjust, to do things differently. But they knew it wasn't going to be easy. They had spent so many years drifting apart, it felt like they were learning to walk again. The hardest part was Emily. She had already been through so much. She had seen the tension between her parents, heard the arguments, and felt the weight of everything that had gone wrong. Even though they were trying to make things better, Emily was still a child, and children could sense when things weren't completely healed. It was a Sunday afternoon when Daniel decided to spend the day with Emily. He had been trying to spend more time with her, to make up for all the years he had missed, but he still didn't know how to talk to her. He had always been the type of dad who was there physically but emotionally distant. He didn't know how to show affection the way Laura did, but he was determined to try. "Hey, kiddo," Daniel said, knocking softly on Emily's bedroom door. "Come in, Dad." Emily's voice was bright, but there was still a hint of sadness there, like she wasn't completely sure if he was really going to stay. Daniel stepped inside, a little nervous. Emily was sitting on her bed, surrounded by her toys and books. She had been drawing, a way to escape and process everything going on in her young life. "What are you working on?" he asked, trying to sound casual, like everything was normal. Emily looked up at him with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She held up a picture she had been drawing, a house with a big yard, a tree, and a family of 4 standing outside. The sun was shining and everything looked peaceful. "It's my happy place," she said softly. "A place where everyone is happy." Daniel's heart sank when he saw the drawing. He realized that Emily wasn't just trying to create a nice picture. She was creating what she wished could be real. A place where everything was okay. A place where they were still the family they used to be. He sat down on the edge of the bed, carefully trying not to make the moment feel too serious. "That's a really nice drawing, Emily," he said. "I bet it would be a great place to live." She nodded, but then her face dropped and the smile faded. "I don't think it's real, though," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't expected to hear her say something like that. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Emily shrugged, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. Everything feels broken now. You and Mom, you're not happy." The words hit Daniel like a punch. How could he have missed how much his daughter understood? How could he have been so blind to her pain? He wasn't used to talking about his feelings, and he had certainly never been good at talking about the hard stuff. But in that moment, he realized that if he didn't start being honest, if he didn't start showing Emily that he cared more than just in words, he would lose her forever. "I'm sorry, Em," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know things have been hard. And I know it's my fault. I haven't been the dad you needed." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide, unsure of what to make of his apology. She was so used to adults telling her everything would be fine. But now, for the first time, Daniel was admitting that things weren't fine, and that they needed to be fixed. "I don't know how to fix it, but I'm trying," he continued, his voice steady now. "I'm really trying, Em, and I'll keep trying." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt something shift in the air. It wasn't all better, not by a long shot, but it was a start. She didn't know how things were going to turn out, but she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. "I know you're trying, Dad," she said, her voice small but sincere. "I can see it." Daniel smiled softly and brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "Thanks, kiddo. I'll do better, I promise." Meanwhile, Laura was working on her own journey of healing. She had started seeing a therapist again, something she hadn't done in years. She knew it was important for her to work through her feelings, about the divorce, about her marriage, and most importantly, about being a better mom for Emily. The therapist's office was cozy and calm. Soft music played in the background, and the room smelled faintly of lavender. Laura sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. It wasn't easy for her to talk about her feelings. She had always kept them bottled up, pretending everything was fine for so long. But she knew that if she didn't face what was inside, she would never be able to move forward. "I feel so lost sometimes," Laura confessed to the therapist, her voice shaky. "I love Emily so much, but I don't know how to fix everything that's broken. I feel like I've let her down." The therapist nodded gently, her tone compassionate. "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot of guilt, Laura, but you can't fix everything all at once. The most important thing is that you're here now, that you're working on yourself and being open with Emily. I just want her to be happy again, Laura said, her voice cracking. She deserves so much more than this. The therapist smiled softly. And she will be happy again, but it will take time. Healing doesn't happen overnight, and it's okay to take small steps. What's important is that you're taking responsibility and doing the work. Laura took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had spent so much time blaming herself for everything that had gone wrong. But she had to realize that it wasn't all her fault. Both she and Daniel had played a part in the breakdown of their marriage. It wasn't just about fixing the past. It was about learning how to move forward. A few weeks later, Laura and Daniel found themselves sitting across from each other once again. This time, it wasn't in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. It was in a small, quiet park near their home. They had decided to meet again, this time without the pressure of legal battles, to talk about how they were both doing. There was no fighting, no accusations, just two parents trying to figure out how to co-parent, how to move forward. "I've been thinking a lot about Emily," Laura said as they both sat on a bench watching the leaves blow in the wind. "I don't want her to feel like she's stuck between us anymore." "I agree," Daniel said, his voice calm. "She shouldn't have to carry that weight. We both need to do better." They talked for hours that afternoon, slowly beginning to rebuild trust. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure. They both loved Emily, and they both wanted what was best for her. That was the starting point. And as the sun set, casting long shadows over the park, they knew that the road ahead would be hard. But for the first time, they felt like they were walking it together. When Emily came home that evening, she could feel the difference. There was something softer in the air between her parents. They weren't perfect. Things weren't magically fixed. But they were trying, and that meant more to her than she could have ever imagined. And for the first time in a long time, Emily believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The months that followed were filled with slow, steady progress. Laura and Daniel worked on being better parents, and they kept their promises to Emily that they would try. But there was no magic fix. Healing took time, and there were days when everything felt like it was falling apart again. But through all the ups and downs, they kept moving forward, one small step at a time. Laura had started to find her balance. The therapy had helped her understand herself better. She no longer blamed herself for everything. It wasn't about what had happened in the past. It was about how she could be the best mom she could be now. And that meant learning to let go of the guilt and focusing on what mattered, being present for Emily. Daniel, too, had begun to change. He had started to make more time for Emily. He stopped using work as an excuse to avoid his feelings and responsibilities. Instead of just being physically present in the house, he was becoming emotionally present too. He was showing up in ways that mattered. It wasn't easy for him, but he knew it was what he had to do. But there was one thing that neither of them had expected: how much time it would take for Emily to truly trust that things had changed. Emily was still cautious, still hesitant. It wasn't that she didn't want to believe her parents. It was just that she had been hurt so many times before. She had seen the arguing, felt the tension, and had lived through the emotional roller coaster of her parents trying and failing to make things work. It wasn't something she could just forget overnight. One afternoon, Daniel decided to take Emily to a nearby park. It had become their special place, a place where they could talk, play, and just enjoy being together. It had started with small, awkward moments, but over time, it had become a place of peace for them. As they walked toward the swings, Daniel could feel the weight of everything between them. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many things he wanted to fix, but it was difficult to find the right words. Emily wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't completely at ease either. "Do you remember when you were little?" Daniel asked, trying to break the silence. "You used to love these swings." Emily smiled, but it was a bittersweet smile. "Yeah, I remember. I always wanted to go as high as I could, like I could touch the sky." Daniel chuckled. "You always did have a lot of energy, but you were always brave. You weren't afraid of anything back then." Emily's eyes flickered to the ground. She pushed her foot against the ground and the swing started moving gently. "I don't feel that way anymore," she said quietly. "I don't feel brave anymore." Daniel's heart sank. It hurt to hear his daughter say that. He had always been proud of her courage, her ability to face things head-on, even when they were hard. But he understood now that it wasn't just about the big things like the divorce, it was the small things too. The trust, the safety, the feeling of being loved without conditions. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I should have been there more. I should have made you feel safe." Emily didn't respond right away. She just kept swinging slowly, looking out at the playground. It was clear that she was thinking, processing. "I know you're trying," she finally said, "but it's hard. I don't know if I can just go back to how things were before." Daniel nodded, understanding. "I don't want you to. I don't want to go back to what it was either. We can't, but I promise you I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it better. For you." Emily stopped swinging and looked at him. "Do you really mean that?" Daniel's heart raced. This was the moment. The one where he had to show her he wasn't just saying the words, he had to prove it. "I do," he said, his voice firm but soft. "I may not have been the dad you needed before, but I will be now. I'm going to make sure of it. I'm going to be there for you no matter what." There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Emily just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll give you a chance." Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't a magical fix, and there was still a long road ahead, but this was progress. This was the trust he had been trying to earn. Back at home, things were still awkward between Laura and Daniel, but in a different way. They weren't fighting, and they weren't ignoring each other. They had found a new kind of balance. They were learning how to talk, how to communicate, and most importantly, how to coexist without all the tension that had filled their home for so long. One evening, after dinner, Laura and Daniel sat down together. It was the first time in a long time they had been in the same room without any interruptions. Emily was in her room reading a book and the house was quiet. "Do you think she's really okay?" Laura asked, her voice filled with concern. She had been watching Emily closely lately, looking for signs that everything was truly okay. She knew her daughter better than anyone, and she could still see the small cracks, the subtle signs that Emily wasn't completely at peace. Daniel looked over at Laura, his expression serious. "I think she's getting there," he said, "but it's going to take time." "We both know that," Laura nodded. "I just don't want her to feel like she's holding everything together for us. I don't want her to think she has to be the strong one." Daniel reached out and took Laura's hand. "She doesn't have to be strong for us. We're the ones who need to be strong for her." For the first time in a long time, they were on the same page. They were working together not just as parents, but as partners. They had both made mistakes, but they had both come to realize that they didn't have to keep making the same ones. They could start fresh and they could rebuild, not just their marriage, but their family. The following weekend, Daniel took Emily to the park again. This time they weren't just going for the swings. This time they were going to spend the entire afternoon together. Daniel had planned a picnic, and he had even brought her favorite snacks. As they spread out the blanket and started to eat, Emily looked at him, her face a little more relaxed than it had been in weeks. "This is nice," she said. Daniel smiled. "I'm glad you think so. I just want to spend time with you. I know I haven't done enough of that." "You're doing better now," Emily said, her tone thoughtful. "I think I'm starting to belie." "You," Daniel's heart warmed. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to make him feel like maybe they had a chance after all. As the weeks passed, things continued to improve. Emily's walls began to come down slowly, and so did Laura's and Daniel's. They were finding their way back to each other, not by going back to the way things had been, but by building something new, something stronger, something more real. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt and fear, but each day they were getting closer to a new kind of normal. They had learned to be patient with each other, to be open, and to keep showing up even when it felt hard. And most importantly, they were learning that healing didn't happen in a straight line. It was messy. It was imperfect. But it was worth it. As Emily finally began to trust that her parents really were trying, she started to let herself believe in the possibility of a better future. And for the first time in a long time, the family began to feel like it was healing. Together. Time passed, and with each day, Laura, Daniel, and Emily continued to learn what it meant to be a family again. It was not an easy journey, and there were days when the cracks from the past still showed, but they were learning to live with them. The idea of healing was no longer about returning to the way things used to be. Instead, it was about creating something new, something stronger together. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Emily suddenly looked up from her plate, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice quieter than usual. Both Daniel and Laura paused, looking at her. Over the past few weeks, they had been so focused on their own healing that they hadn't really asked Emily how she was feeling. They were starting to realize that just because the tension between them had eased didn't mean it was all smooth sailing for her. "About what?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his tone casual, though a small knot formed in his stomach. He had learned to be more aware of how Emily was feeling, but it still made him nervous to hear her talk so seriously. "I don't want to feel like this anymore," Emily said, her eyes shifting between her parents. "Like I'm stuck in between you two. Like I have to choose who I'm going to be close to today or who I have to tiptoe around." Laura's heart ached at Emily's words. She knew exactly what Emily meant. There had been too many moments in the past where it had felt like they were all just walking on eggshells, unsure of what was going to happen next. It was exhausting and it was hard on Emily. But now things had changed and they needed to make sure Emily didn't feel that way anymore. "I understand, sweetie," Laura said softly. "We don't want you to feel like that. We want you to feel safe with both of us, no matter what." Daniel nodded in agreement. "I know it's been confusing and I'm sorry for that. We should have done better by you." Emily didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at them, as if deciding whether she could believe them. And then finally she spoke again. "I guess it's okay," she said quietly. "I mean, you're trying. I can see that." The words hit both parents deeply. Emily's willingness to forgive, to give them another chance, was something neither of them had expected. They had known she was hurt, that she had been carrying her own weight through all of this, but hearing her say she could see them trying made everything feel a little bit lighter. That night, after dinner, the family decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool and the streets were quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stillness. It had become a small tradition for them to take these evening walks together, a time to reflect, to reconnect, and to just be a family without the weight of everything else. "I was thinking," Daniel began as they walked, "maybe we should go on a little trip soon. Just the three of us. Somewhere peaceful. A weekend away, maybe." Laura glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" He smiled, the first real smile he had given her in weeks. "Yeah, I think it's time. A change of scenery might be good for all of us. No distractions, just some time to breathe." Emily, who had been walking a few steps ahead of them, stopped and turned around. "Where would we go?" Daniel and Laura exchanged a look, both unsure of where exactly they wanted to go, but knowing that they needed a place where they could all just relax and enjoy being together. "How about a cabin in the mountains?" Laura suggested. "Somewhere we can walk, talk, and just be outside." "I think we all need that." Emily's face lit up. "That sounds awesome. I love nature." The idea of a trip, of stepping away from the everyday stresses, was exactly what they needed. They began to plan, looking up places to stay and imagining the adventures they could have. It was a small step, but it was a big one for their family. It was a sign that they were starting to feel comfortable again, that they could make plans and look forward to the future without fear of what might happen next. The weekend arrived, and they packed up the car for their trip to the cabin. Emily was practically bouncing with excitement, asking questions about the cabin and what they would do once they got there. Daniel and Laura were quieter, but there was a peaceful energy between them. They had learned to enjoy the quiet moments, to appreciate the times when they didn't have to talk about the past or worry about the future. When they arrived at the cabin, it was everything they had hoped for. It was tucked away in the woods, surrounded by towering trees and the sound of a nearby stream. The air was fresh and clean, and there was a feeling of calm that immediately settled over them. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic pace of their everyday lives. As they settled in, they spent the evening outside, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. Emily ran around the yard, laughing as she tried to catch the fireflies that seemed to be everywhere. Daniel and Laura watched her, their hearts full. For the first time in a long time, they felt like they were really seeing her. The tension was gone, and there was just the three of them, together in this moment. That night, they sat around the small fire pit outside the cabin, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The stars above were brighter than any of them had seen in a long time. It felt like the world had slowed down, and for just a little while they could forget about everything else. "I'm glad we came here," Emily said, her eyes bright from the firelight. "This is the best thing that's happened in a long time," Laura smiled, her heart swelling. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. We all needed this." Daniel took a deep breath, looking up at the stars. "This is what it's all about. This is what we've been working for, to be here, together." For a moment, everything felt perfect. It was a feeling they had almost forgotten, but now it was back. This sense of peace, of being a family again. They were no longer stuck in the past, no longer weighed down by what had happened before. They were moving forward with hope. The next day, they went on a hike together. It was a simple trail, but it was beautiful, filled with wildflowers, streams, and birds singing overhead. As they walked, Daniel and Laura talked about the future, about what they wanted to do when they got back home. They spoke of things like family dinners, movie nights, and making sure they stayed connected no matter how busy life got. Emily was ahead of them on the trail, running from one side to the other, enjoying the freedom of the outdoors. Daniel and Laura walked side by side, their steps matching, their hearts light. "I think we're doing okay," Laura said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Better than okay." Daniel looked at her, his expression sincere. "I think we are too." As they continued their hike, they realized that they had come a long way. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that was all that mattered. By the time they returned from the trip, they had a new sense of closeness, a new understanding of what it meant to be a family. The trip had reminded them that even when things felt difficult, there was still so much beauty in their lives. There was still so much to be grateful for. Emily had changed too. She had started to trust again, not just her parents, but also herself. She was no longer walking on eggshells. She was letting herself be a kid again, enjoying life without constantly worrying about what was going to happen next. And that, more than anything, made Laura and Daniel realize just how far they had come. When they arrived back home, they felt different. The house felt different, warmer, more alive. There was still work to be done, but they knew now that they could handle it. They had each other. They had their family. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.